This is Someone Like Me, the official podcast of Ancora, Tennessee. I'm Leslie Eiler Thompson. If you've listened to this show before, you know that the mission of this organization is to nurture survivor healing and strategically combat human trafficking in the state of Tennessee. We do that through training of frontline professionals, aftercare services for minor and adult victims of trafficking, as well as advocacy at the state level and prevention programming. Because of the work we do, we're often asked about trafficking when current events occur related to the subject. With recent movies and news stories covering the subject of human trafficking, we brought together 3 experts for a panel discussion webinar, one of which is a trafficking survivor herself, to speak to the nature of child trafficking in Tennessee. This special bonus episode is hosted by AncoraTN CEO Kelli Cary, with guests Cyntoia Brown-Long, the Commissioner of the Department of Children's Services and former AncoraTN CEO Margie Quin, and Jeremy Lofquest from the TBI. At the end of the discussion, I'll be back with some practical ways you can get involved in preventing this crime, as well as ways to help survivors thrive as they heal and build lives outside of trafficking.
I'm so thrilled to introduce you to our counter-trafficking experts that are joining us today for this important discussion. We have Cyntoia Brown-Long, who is the director and co-founder of the JFAM Foundation. We have Commissioner Margie Quin, who is the commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. And then we also have with us Jeremy Lofquest, who is the assistant special agent in charge of TBI's Human Trafficking Unit. So to kick off our panel, I'm going to start with Cyntoia, and I'm going to ask if each of our panelists can explain your role and what got you into anti-trafficking work. So we'll start with Cyntoia and then move to Commissioner Quin and then Jeremy.
Hi. So actually my role and, the whole anti-trafficking thing really began with Ancora, which used to be In Slavery, Tennessee, because it was a commercial that was run as part of a public awareness initiative that talked about what trafficking is. And I never would have equated my own experiences to what was commonly considered trafficking. But they really opened my eyes to the realities of it and what it actually looks like. And so that just filled me with this passion to educate other people, especially young people, because that public education is such a big part of young people actually identifying themselves. There could have been 1 million people lined up to tell me what happened with me was trafficking. It was not something of my own volition, but until I actually recognized that myself and until I could actually look at the reality of it and align it with my own experience, I would have never been receptive to actually healing from that and to moving past that. And so that's why I've just become very impassioned about that. I run an organization where we work with young people to educate them and then also encourage them to use their voice, because I think their voice is the most important voice in this whole fight. And so I know we'll talk about it a little later on, but that's one of the initiatives that I've been working on, and it was largely inspired by In Slavery's own initiative.
My name is Margie Quin, and I'm currently the commissioner of the Department of Children's Services. And thanks, Kelli, for having us today. What a great timing on this webinar. I am in a unique position, having been in Jeremy's position for about 11 years, having been in Kelli's position for a little over 3 years. But it was in doing the work at TBI as an assistant special agent in charge around 2008, 2009. I was over the Missing Children's Clearinghouse. And I began to understand during that time period that some of Tennessee's missing children were being trafficked. And I have said for some years now that once you know that, you can never not know that again. And the director at the time allowed me to do something about that. And the legislature at the time sort of commissioned a study to be conducted across the state, where we both quantified and qualified trafficking across all 95 counties. And you can still find that research report on TBI's outreach website, ithastostop.com. And what we were really looking at was the impact of trafficking on children and youth. And I think everyone's eyes were opened tremendously to how much was occurring, where it was occurring, how it was occurring. And that, I think, changed the trajectory of kind of everything I was doing at TBI. And that's what led me into the work that I was doing then, what I did after TBI, and some of the current efforts that I'm engaged in at DCS. And so I'm excited to talk about that as the webinar continues.
I'm Jeremy Lofquest. I am the current Assistant Special Agent in charge over the TBI's Human Trafficking Unit. We've got about 7 agents working right now across the state in every grand region to combat trafficking. I took this position in about 2018, and every day is a learning experience. As Commissioner Quin said, there's a lot that you learn that you can't unlearn, but I think part of that drives what we as a team are trying to do, and what we do with a lot of our partnerships with Ancora and DCS and some of the other partnerships we have out there, because we look at this common goal and look at what we're up against, right? But that drives, I think, every one of us, especially on my team. There's a lot of passion with it. So I came from a criminal investigative background before that down in Chattanooga, had worked a few cases with a trafficking agent down there. And once we moved to Nashville, this position opened up, and it just really seemed like something that was really going to make an impact, right? And so that's kind of where I ended up trying to get into this. Plus, I had a lot of buy-in with the Bureau as a whole, especially the leadership at the time, and definitely the leadership now. So that makes it a little easier on our side, being a state agency. So when you've got buy-in from the top down, right, that makes a lot of help there for us. So I'm excited to be on this. I think this is great. Thank you for inviting us to the table, and I'm really looking forward to moving through some of these topics today.
That's wonderful. And I think that what you said, Jeremy, is so true. We're all here because we're so passionate about this issue. And we work so collaboratively and closely together that it really takes all of these perspectives to make a difference to combat human trafficking. And the first question that I want to move into is really going to set the stage on why we wanted to have this discussion at this timely moment. There's a lot of discussion about what human trafficking is or what it looks like right now in public discourse. A lot of confusion, a lot of myths. So I'm hoping that we can just start. Commissioner Quin, if you wouldn't mind just starting by defining human trafficking. When we say human trafficking, what do we mean when we're using those words?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. I always like to start with just what the legal definition is, because I think that tells us exactly what it is and what it's not. When a person over the age of 18 engages in a commercial sex act by means of force, fraud, or coercion, that is human trafficking. So you have a person that's over the age of 18, they engage in a commercial sex act, and there's use of force, fraud, or coercion. Then you have human trafficking. So a commercial sex act is a sex act that occurs when something of value is exchanged. So value can be money, guns, drugs. It can also be shelter. It can be food. It can be clothing. Anything of value in exchange for sex makes it a commercial sex act. So when a person is under the age of 18 and engages in a commercial sex act, the government does not need to prove force or fraud or coercion, just that a person is under the age of 18 and a commercial sex act occurs. So think about that shelter, that clothing, that food, any of those things in exchange for sex makes it a commercial sex act. And when that person is under the age of 18, that makes it a human trafficking act. So if a mother allows a landlord to have sex with her 14-year-old daughter in exchange for rent money, that makes it a commercial sex act. that makes it a human trafficking act. And you can charge both the landlord and the mother. The statute in Tennessee, as well as federally, allows you to charge both the buyer in the act as well as the seller in the act. And that's where I think these statutes are very interesting, because as you can see in the news, the TBI has been very, very active, starting with the unit when I ran it back in 2015. We have done a lot of what we call demand reduction, proactive operations. The Bureau has continued to run those all across the state. And what we're really looking at is trying to reduce the demand for children as well as adults, but going after the individuals who are out there intentionally looking for children to purchase. We want to try to reduce the demand for this product, if you will, because under our statute, as well as the federal statute, you can charge the buyer as a trafficker under our statute. And I think that's a really important piece of information that we want to make sure the public understands. And that's how I would really define trafficking.
That's super helpful. And I think the details are so helpful too, so that everyone knows when we're giving examples like the one that you gave, that really crystallizes and puts some of those like federal and state definitions that makes it clear for everyone to understand what we're talking about. As we move on, I'd love to talk about the role of media. So popular media places a large emphasis on trafficking with strangers or children being kidnapped. These are not the experiences that we see at Ancora on a regular basis. Can you tell us a little bit about who's facilitating trafficking in the state of Tennessee? Who are those traffickers? And we'll start, Jeremy, with you. What are you seeing at TBI?
So I think, like you said, media, right? They're pushing the kidnapping, the white vans pulling up and snatching kids or women and running them overseas and that kind of thing. Like you said, that is not at all the norm. Here in Tennessee, it's a very, very small percentage of what we're seeing. I think kind of jump into the second part of the question with who are the traffickers is a good place to go before we get into kind of how trafficking is kind of happening in the state. But really, like Margie touched on, you have both buyers and sellers that are considered traffickers, right? And either one of those groups can literally be anybody. It's not just the shady guy that lives down the street that nobody ever sees, but there's cars in and out all the time. It can be a high school coach. It can be one part of a religious group. It can be a CEO. It can be homeless people. It can be any of that kind of demographic, right? It's across the board. And on the buyer side, it's the same thing. We see it completely across the board, from blue collar to white collar and everywhere in between, right? Now, how trafficking is kind of happening in Tennessee, what we've seen more and more, especially probably in the last 3 or 4 years, it was there before, but it's really jumped, is very internet business driven. It's right out there in the regular internet sphere. It's not the dark web and all the scary corners of the internet, right? It's there. It's happening on social media. It's happening through all these chat rooms, and then obviously some known commercial sex advertisement sites too. And what we're seeing is our vulnerable populations, specifically runaways and these children that are in rough situations to begin with, are kind of getting funneled into situations that are allowing these traffickers, these master manipulators, as I like to call them, into this horrible situation, right? They're providing something that they need, whether that's love, attention, food, money, shelter, whatever it is, transportation, all of that. And then at some point they're manipulated into providing these commercial sex acts, and then not getting anything in return, right? They're becoming a product and being used. So we're seeing a lot of that, especially in the juvenile realm, but that's also happening a lot with adults too. I think there's a ton of focus on the children. I think there needs to be a ton of focus on, these vulnerable children, but there's also vulnerable adults in this realm too that probably needs more media coverage, right? So we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of it happen gradually, and this manipulation in general. So then we're trying to focus on the children in order to kind of stem the flow of these kids into those traffickers' hands, right? And that's where, having Commissioner Quin over there at DCS with her new unit she started up and all that has just been so pivotal in our ability to kind of get after this. So, and that's the quick down and dirty 5-minute version. I'm sure Commissioner Quin or Cyntoia will have definitely more to add to that.
Thank you so much. No, that was really helpful. I'll allow Cyntoia or Commissioner Quin to add to that. I think that the thing that most people are surprised when I'm out speaking in the community is when I share how often it's really trusted individuals that are facilitating trafficking, intimate partners, caregivers, landlords, employers, people who have that trusted relationship. And I think that the community is usually pretty shocked when I'm sharing that during training. Cyntoia or Commissioner Quin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think like when we're talking about media, like you see the girl who's bound up and, Jeremy talked about, people who are being thrown into the back of vans, things like that, the white van that's picking people off the streets. You hear all that stuff and it's really does more harm than good because people see that and they think, oh, well, I'm informed. I know what this really is. I like to talk about trafficking in the form of exploitation because then it really does cover what it actually looks like. So you have young people who are on the streets or who are in these environments where they have different needs or they're susceptible to a lot of this glamorization of this certain lifestyle, right? And that's really where I put my focus into these young people because those are the ones that I see that are coming in. I actually partner with an organization called Epic Girl that focuses on prevention. It's not necessarily a trafficking organization. We focus on prevention for at-risk girls. And these are the girls that you're seeing getting caught up in these situations. And, they look at these people as, oh, this is my homeboy or this is my older boyfriend. And it's not, the guy who's sitting in the house and has all these women in the house and what you would traditionally think of as, a pimp or something like that. And I think that media really does a disservice, especially when you have films like, The Sound of Freedom just coming out here all huge and everybody's flocking to see this film. But it's like the majority of people who are victimized by exploitation like that, they can't identify with that. That was the problem with me, why I really didn't identify with that, because I didn't see anybody that had an experience like mine that was identifying as, no, this is actually exploitation. Like what Margie said about if you're under the age of 18, people don't really get that. You don't have to be tied up and bound and kept in a basement. Just the fact that someone is paying you for sex, that someone is giving you a place to stay in exchange for sex, that is trafficking, that is exploitation. And so I feel like groups like Ancora, other organizations, the work that's being done to really educate on what it is important to combat a lot of the other media that comes in.
I think the only thing I would add is just that I think vulnerable youth, and we know that as many as 1 in 6, according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, 1 in 6 children who are trafficked in the United States are coming out of the foster care system. That's why it was so important when I came into the Department of Children's Services to really stand up a unit that was just dedicated to serving trafficked youth in the state. And there's a debate internally whether I started this new unit on week 1 after I was sworn in, or I waited till week 2. But we now have specially trained case managers who only have trafficked youth on their caseload, and they work specifically with the TBI and with our Tennessee Counter Trafficking Alliance partners, and the 3 of us work together all across the state to serve trafficked youth in ways that I think are now really intentional. These case managers now have over, I think, 350 trafficked youth on their caseload, and it's growing exponentially. And I would say in the next 12 months, that number will double, given the data that we're seeing. And so I think that the only thing that I would add is that I think juveniles get themselves into situations, they're sort of lured and manipulated, as Cyntoia said, into situations that look really glamorous and really promising and so much better than where they're coming from. And they're boyfriended and they fall in love, and they're buying into something that they're missing at home. And then the table is turned, the situation changes, and then they can't get out of it. It becomes a situation that is extremely scary and extremely traumatic, and in some cases very violent, and there's no escape from it. And once they go down that road, it becomes virtually impossible to get out of it. And so that's why it's incredibly important to have organizations like Ancora in Middle Tennessee, Restore Core in West Tennessee, Grow Free in East Tennessee, who can serve these minors over the long term as they heal, as we recognize and respond, because it's going to take a long time to heal from that kind of exploitation. And Epic Girl, working with the prevention out of the Davidson County Juvenile Court also does a great job. But Ancora is a critical partner for us. The 3 of us now have an MOU that for the first time ever. And I think it's going to be very promising, the work that we're going to be able to do together as we work with juveniles across the state. The key, though, I think, is in getting them identified as quickly as possible. And that requires training. And, the work of Cyntoia, I think, is going to be incredibly important. Recognizing and identifying juveniles as quickly as we possibly can. The longer they stay in exploitation, the harder it is to pull them out, and the longer the road to healing becomes. So I think that's going to be critically important.
So much good information there. And I bet that, we probably have attendees that's the first time they're hearing some of those vulnerabilities. I'm curious if, Commissioner Quin, if you would be able to expound on some of the vulnerabilities you mentioned with the individuals that are coming out of the child welfare system. Like why are children that are in foster care or that have child welfare involvement or in the criminal justice system, why are they more vulnerable maybe than another youth? And then I'd love to go to Cyntoia after that.
Yeah, I think kids that are coming into the foster care system or who are coming into children's services, who are brought in through the court system, I think it's important to know that DCS doesn't bring children into custody. The courts bring children into custody. I think that's a little myth I can dispel. The courts bring children into custody. They bring children into custody because of neglect, because a drug addicted parent, because the situation at home is not the right environment for a child, because there's abuse at home, because parents can no longer care for their child. because persistent conditions at home, because the family needs services at home that where we need to step in, and the child can no longer live at home. Obviously, drug addiction by parents, incarceration by parents. And when children come into custody, it's because the department has been unable to locate a relative caregiver, a kinship caregiver, a safety placement. And as a last resort, a child is brought into custody, which means a child has no safety net underneath them. And that is a very vulnerable feeling for a child. But when you think about a child coming into custody under those circumstances, trauma has already occurred and adverse childhood experiences have already occurred. And so they have witnessed potentially addiction and abuse, and violence in the home potentially. They may be without parents or have already suffered the loss of a parent. They may have witnessed repeated incidents of domestic violence at home. They may be suffering from mental illness themselves. They may have witnessed mental illness by, with parents or caregivers at home. And so all of these things in combination create tremendous vulnerabilities, for that child. And then to place them in the foster care system, again, where they have no safety net, creates tremendous vulnerabilities for a child. And then if you have a child that has suffered previous childhood sexual abuse that has gone unmitigated or untreated, you have what's called compounding complex trauma. And that then becomes kind of a recipe for disaster. Then once that child begins to use drugs to cope as a coping mechanism, begins to run as a coping mechanism. Once a child begins to run, they are incredibly vulnerable for exploitation. They're going to be exploited once they run. There's just no way they're not going to be exploited once they run. Once they become a drug user, a substance abuser, and a runner, there's no way there's almost no way they're going to escape exploitation.
Yeah, so I think Margie, like she's right on the money there. I would just add, my own experience. Before I was ever trafficked, I was a 13-year-old runaway, and I ran away from DCS. I didn't run away from home. So I actually came into custody after getting in trouble at school. So I had some problems with teachers and I was expelled. I ended up getting put into custody for catching a charge there at an alternative school in my county. And what I found was that when I was in DCS custody, I wasn't receiving any kind of care or treatment that would really help me overcome whatever was going on with me. The same for the other kids. We kind of just got there and festered. There were no programs coming in. There was a lot of independent contractors who kind of could just do whatever. Wasn't really a lot of oversight in what was happening. There was no individual treatment plans. It was kind of just, we were just warehoused there. And, that's pretty much continued until recently with DCS. I know I was personally very excited whenever Commissioner Quin took over for DCS, because I was like, yes, finally something is going to be done here, because it's really just been horrible. Just the state of the facilities. I actually go every week into a DCS facility. So I work with the girls there. It's run by a contractor. I see a lot of the problems that are happening. And I know Margie already has a plan to address some of those. And that's going to be really important, because that really shapes vulnerability. Because if you're thinking, okay, well, people who run away, the kids who are running away are most vulnerable, and that's what makes them vulnerable to being exploited. You have to address why they're running away. Why are they going to these places where they're supposed to be healed, where they're supposed to be receiving this care, and why are they running from it? So what strategies need to be employed to make sure that, these are places where they're getting better, where they're getting care? Another issue is a lot of the girls, when they do have access to groups, so when they are coming to different classes like Epic Girl, there's others that have come into the facilities as well. It's like they're doing their work, but they get out and they go back to the same environments. Their family has not been doing their work. And so it's just a matter of time before they're back into the same situations. And here you see them back at the facility a month or two later. And so it's like, well, what more can we do for the family as a whole? When we see a child who is going through something, what can we do with the resources that we have? Can it be in DCS? Can DCS partner with another agency to actually address that issue with the whole family unit? Because putting a kid, back into the same situation is going to lead to the same results 9 times out of 10. And that's definitely what I tend to see.
That's so helpful and really insightful. Thank you for sharing all of that, Cyntoia. And I think that, we can identify definitely the gaps and the things that we see that lead to vulnerabilities. And what we really try to do, which I love about us as a working group and us as a state, is we really try to focus also on the protective factors. So how do we increase those protective factors? How do we wrap those services around to ensure that people are cared for? And so I would love to talk to Jeremy a little bit about some cases here in Tennessee. We've given some great examples, but what trends are you seeing, or what cases is TBI seeing that maybe would be helpful for the community to understand, so that when we share resources at the end, what are some things that they can be looking for? What are those indicators that you would like to share with the community, so that when they want to call the Tennessee Human Trafficking Hotline, that they have that information?
We've touched on some kind of general case types that you would definitely see, and we are seeing, I think, one that Margie talked about at the very beginning is something that we're starting to see a little bit more. It's tougher to see, but through our partnerships with DCS and some other local agencies on the side of familial trafficking. So you've got a family member or someone that's exploiting that child in order to receive something. I think one of the things that always sticks with me is there's nothing more dangerous to a child than a drug addicted mother. I think with that's where we're seeing some of the familial cases coming up, are these drug addicted parents or step parents that are then utilizing that child as a form of payment, right, for their drug debts or to get more dope or whatever. And so we've been seeing some more of that. I know a lot of the focus on this is sex trafficking, right? But we're definitely seeing labor trafficking pop up more and more, which, the definition's very similar to sex trafficking. You just take the Commercial Sex Act with some form of labor, right? And then you've got an exchange of something of value and the person that's having to do it, right? Under force, fraud, or coercion. So we're seeing that some more and more across the state. And then, a little bit to the point that Cyntoia and Margie were making in the previous question, we've seen specifically several times kids that have gone into group homes or, some type of group facility, right, that are going in to get away from one bad situation, and they're getting linked up with people that have been either previously trafficked or are in the custody there at this same one, and kind of told and manipulated into, hey, when we get out where we can run from this, we've got a really, really good thing going. And we've seen those girls come out running together oftentimes, right back to a trafficker or several traffickers, and then coming across the state in several instances where, while we are looking for that missing kid, we are doing investigative measures where we can almost track by some of the commercial sex ads and things that are out there where they're at across the state. And luckily, through regular traffic stops made by, Tennessee Highway Patrol or local agencies that look and go, something's not right here with this person, they then call us. Now, some of those things that they're seeing through the training that they've got and things that we put out there is, you've got an individual that a young person that is either going to be inappropriately dressed for the situation they're in. They're not with family, and the stories aren't mixing up or aren't matched up. Aren't matched up on why they're on this trip. Lots of hotel receipts and everything else. And the potential victim there a lot of times is not going to be addressing those people of authority in what you would consider a normal manner, right? They're going to be kind of protected from them by these traffickers and not being able to respond directly. There's a whole list of these indicators that we have on our website. I believe you guys do too, over at Ancora. And the thing I always tell people is, yeah, you can read all these and look at them all, but it doesn't mean they have to check every box. I kind of put it up to the spidey sense, especially parents and police and people in caregiving situations. They're going to have that spidey sense, right? Something that just doesn't sit right. And if you can't get to the bottom of it and it's something that just isn't sitting right, that's when we encourage people to call that hotline. Let us figure it out. We're the investigative arm of this, right? Let us dig into it. We don't want you trying to run after cars and pull people out and that kind of thing. There's ways to get the people that do that involved, right? So there's a whole bunch of indicators that are out there, but it's really all about that kind of, hey, something's not right in this situation. This person's not kind of fitting in with what we're looking at and the totality of that circumstance. So that's where I put that kind of on some of those indicators. I hate to give people just a list to go by, because then they'll check all the boxes and say, oh, hey, we didn't check this box. And that's not always the case. So
super helpful. Thank you so much, Jeremy. And we will have the Tennessee Human Trafficking Hotline shared at the end of the presentation so that you have that for a resource. I'm going to ask one more question before we move on to our Q&A. So, but before we do, Cyntoia, can you tell us a little bit about what healing looks like? So a survivor experiences a significant amount of trauma during exploitation. What are some of the healing services that an individual might need when they're on their journey?
So I can tell you from my personal experience, a big part of the healing is going to be discovering your identity. One of the things that was probably the biggest contributing factor with me and my own exploitation is like really losing my identity, allowing other people to shape that and what that was, allowing society to really shape that. So I discovered my identity in Christ, and that is where my healing comes from. And so that means that, all the shame that I kind of carried around after the fact, that was erased. Like, I don't have anything to be ashamed of. I'm not going to take ownership of something that someone else did to me. I'm not going to do that. Realizing there's purpose in everything that happened, that, it doesn't matter how awful it was. It doesn't matter how much it hurt. Like, God can do something beautiful with that. And so really finding a purpose in that pain, that's really important. A lot of people place emphasis on rescue. Oh, we have to get them out of this situation. But what comes after that? There's a whole life ahead of this person that you have to think of, that comes in, is there going to be other people putting them in these same situations? How are they going to learn how to equip themselves to avoid those situations or to get out of those situations? And so really helping them to develop those tools, that's really important. Thinking about financially, if we're just going to be real about it, because that's a huge factor. When people are put in binds in situations like that and they think, oh, well, I know this for sure, this is an easy way to pay my bills, to get money. Well, what other options do they have? What talents do they have? How can they nurture those talents? Can you teach them the business skills that they need to be successful on their own? Maybe not working for someone. I know God didn't create me to work for anybody else. And so I try to teach my girls to figure out what talents has God given you and teach them the business skills that they need to be successful and to build those opportunities for themselves. I think all of that goes hand in hand. You know, you have to think about, well, how can you get them to a place of healing, but how can you help them to sustain that place, to not go back to what they knew before. So that's really important in my eyes. And that's what's really been, you know, the defining factor for me.
I love all of that. That's amazing. I think that you hit so many good points of the inward healing, but also the external things that someone needs, like employment and financial resources and things like that. So both are so critical. Thank you so much for sharing, Cyntoia. That was really helpful. I'm going to look at our Q&A box. We have several questions here that I will pose to our panelists. So what can be done to prevent human trafficking? So a lot of folks are saying, you know, that they're learning about this for the first time. Would someone like to speak to the prevention side of things? What can we do to prevent trafficking from happening?
I'll start. I think when we first started talking about trafficking in the state, we started passing a lot of laws around 2010, 2011, 2012. And one of the first things we really started to talk about was public awareness and training and education. You first have to understand what it is in order to be able to prevent it. So things like this webinar are a huge part of prevention. Without the knowledge to understand what it is, there's no way to prevent it. And so I think for talking about child trafficking, we've really got to talk about training and education in the schools in a way that's both intentional and meaningful, that doesn't scare parents and kids to death, but gives them the tools to protect themselves. And all that, I think, starts online. Jeremy said it. This is an internet-based crime in large part, but also when you're talking about familial trafficking, it also can be very insidious and can happen within families. But you also have to give tools to kids to be able to find their voice. If kids think this is normal and this is normalized within families, you have to be able to give kids education to find their voice, to be able to speak their truth. And so the way you do that is by putting prevention training in the schools. We've done that. There's mandatory training now in the schools with teachers across all law enforcement. We've been doing that since 2015, 2016 in the state. And so I think when you talk about prevention training, I think Ancora has got some tremendous prevention training they've been doing. I think Epic Girl has some prevention training. I know Cyntoia is doing a lot of work with young people. I think all of those things in combination, we just got to get bigger and bigger at doing it. And the public awareness campaigns, I think, probably need to start back up again. But all of those things in combination are what we need to do and we just need to keep talking about it. I think probably 5 years ago, folks thought we hit the peak of trafficking, but I don't really think we're there yet. The numbers continue to keep going up and up and up. And that's because demand keeps going up and up. You know, that thing we talked about 20 minutes ago, as long as demand is still there, then we still got to talk about trafficking. And that's the bottom line.
Absolutely. And another thing, that I like to stress that I feel like is extremely important is we have to do more education on healthy relationships. What is a healthy relationship? What are boundaries? That's my favorite word. And so when I work with the girls, I teach them. Stacia, my partner with Epic Girl, she teaches them, has an entire identity curriculum where we talk about healthy relationships, where we talk about boundaries, because that's really important for prevention. The minute you come across somebody that's really hinging on those, infringing on those boundaries, that should set off flags in your head. With the work that we're doing with the Glitter Project, the girls, they actually, in addition to putting out facts about trafficking, what trafficking looks like, they're putting words of affirmation out for other young people to hear, because the first time that a young girl hears that she's beautiful, that she's talented, that she's amazing, shouldn't be from a trafficker, because they love to tell you all of that. And so they should be hearing that from the community. So if you want to get involved with prevention, not only is it important for you to get involved with groups like Ancora, but also like get involved with the kids in your community, get involved with them, have those relationships. Someone asked about, red flags. I think that was one of the questions earlier that Jeremy answered. Kind of put that out of your mind. Like the biggest red flag, is going to come when you actually have a conversation. You actually get to know these young people and you notice something is different. You have to have that relationship. You have to have that constant interaction to realize if something is off. Like I didn't have any kind of tattoos or brands. I wasn't wearing designer clothes or traveling across state lines, but anybody who was really having a relationship with me, really had a constant interaction, they would have noticed that something was different, that something was off. And that is the only red flag that you really need. So really get involved, whether it's, in community centers, whether it's in your church, in your school, in your family, your neighbors, like get involved, start having conversations with the kids, get involved in their lives and try to figure out, what's going on with them and notice when things are changing.
Incredible. I couldn't agree more. We talk so much about that at Ancora, about safety and relationship. If that's what we can provide, that rapport is so important, because that's where you get to know someone and really build those trusted, healthy relationships. I'm going to ask one more question. I think it's a really good one for us to be able to know what happens when somebody calls the Tennessee Human Trafficking Hotline. So I have a question from a hospital provider on here that says, hey, when I call the Tennessee Human Trafficking Hotline, what's going to take place? So who's going to answer? Where did the calls go? Jeremy, would you be able to answer that for us?
Absolutely. And this is a great question and plays right into a little bit of one of our initiatives on moving towards some more education of our frontline workers there at hospitals and community health places. So you call the hotline, right? Someone's going to answer the phone during the daytime. That's going to be a very experienced person that's going to know exactly everything about what you're about to tell them and be able to direct what your needs are, be able to kind of point you in the right direction on what that tip's going to require. If you're a healthcare provider and you're saying, hey, I've got someone here potentially trafficked, so on and so forth, what that staffer is going to do then is they're going to contact one of the local agents, human trafficking agents in your area. And that person's probably that agent's then going to call you back after you have called the hotline. Very quickly. I can almost guarantee that. That's a big part of our job, and we make sure to do that. So we'll call you back and get someone out there, boots on the ground, to be there with you to help kind of wade through some of that information. At night, same thing's going to happen, but there might be a little more delay, right? People sleep at night. Some of us do anyways, not all of us, but you're still going to have that same response. The person's going to take your information, get a callback number, and then call you back and get some boots on the ground out there for you. We also have task force agents across the state with local departments that can come help as well. You will still need to report to DCS. Calling the Tennessee Human Trafficking Hotline does not fulfill the mandated reporting guidelines on that. So there will be 2 calls there. Sometimes, depending on the situation, we can walk through that with you or take that over to local law enforcement, however that works. But you would still need to make your report to DCS as well. But then from there on the law enforcement side, that would start our side. Now, if it's someone that's not looking for law enforcement involvement, that's fine. What the staffer would do upon receiving that hotline call would then either put you directly in touch, forward the call, or give the information to Ancora or Restore Corps or Grow Free out west, depending on your geographic location, and say, hey, these are the people you need to call. They're going to be right there next to you to help you through this. Kelli obviously can talk more about what that process would look like, but on the hotline side, that's what that would look like. We would direct pass, either a warm handoff or just provide back, depending on the needs of the caller at the time, that resource, and then there will be a response appropriate with that as well. Did that answer all of that? I think.
Yes, that was so helpful. Yes, that answered the question. And so glad you touched on the DCS and reporting as well. I will also add that on our end, we also have a 24/7 response, just like law enforcement. So as victim service providers, we are there. We are in hospital rooms. We are at the law enforcement station. We are out in the community. We are helping facilitate safe shelter. So we absolutely will respond 24/7 as well. And our phone number was at the beginning of the slides, and I'll make sure that it's included in our follow-up communication. To wrap this up, I'd like to close by giving a call to action, some ways that community members can get involved in this important work. So I'll start with Cyntoia. Can you share with us a little bit about the Glitter Project? And then I can share a little bit about Ancora and ways that folks can get involved with us.
Yeah, so the Glitter Project is something that came about years ago when I was still incarcerated, after I was first discovering, what trafficking really is, and just really felt this passion to educate other people. Glitter stands for the Grassroots Learning Initiative on Teen Trafficking, Exploitation, and Rape. Once I was released, I joined forces with Stacia from Epic Girl, and we've been really adamant about this being a youth-led initiative. And so a public awareness initiative, talking about trafficking, talking about exploitation that includes gangs, because gangs exploit kids all the time. Most of the kids that I serve, they've been exploited by them in some form. And just really talking about what it is and really coming up with prevention strategies. And so they finally come to a point where they feel like they're ready to roll it out. And so next month, August, we'll actually start leaving glitter rocks with little notes that have facts, that have words of encouragement, words of affirmation. And also we're going to include the human trafficking hotline number on there that we're just going to leave all around town. Because one of the things that, is really important is getting the information to the people who need it. I would have never seen that commercial if I wasn't sitting in a prison cell looking at TV all day with nothing else to do. And so getting the information into the hands of the people who need to know it. And so if you are around town somewhere and you see one of these glitter rocks and these notes somewhere, we just encourage you, to share it on your social media. You can use the hashtag and then take that and leave it somewhere else. Pass it on. And we just are going to see what happens with this. We are really hoping that this is going to become the official awareness kind of initiative for Tennessee. And so we're just going to see how it shapes up, but it's all their brainchild. It's all they're doing, and it's finally come to fruition. It's going to come out in August. So
super exciting. I love hearing that. And I love that idea of how encouraging it is and pointing people to the hotline. That's wonderful.
Here are 3 practical takeaways from this conversation. 1, you can educate yourself about human trafficking. And you can easily do this by listening to all of the episodes of this podcast or by subscribing to our newsletter at AncoraTN.org. 2, you can invest in survivors. You can actually support survivors as they heal from trafficking by being a monthly donor through Ancora Tennessee's Hands of Hope Society. For as little as $5 a month, you can provide sustainable support as a survivor reclaims and rebuilds their life. Go to AncoraTN.org/handsofhope or use the link in the show notes to learn more. And 3, you can save the human trafficking hotline phone number for Tennessee and share it with others. That number is 855-558-6484. Hey, one last thing. Tickets are now on sale for Voices of Freedom, our most anticipated event of the year. Join us at the famous Loveless Cafe in Nashville on September 15th for an evening of great food, live entertainment, and hope building as we raise funds to invest in the lives of human trafficking survivors. I'll be there emceeing, and I can't wait to see you. Get your tickets at AncoraTN.org/VOF 2023. For someone like me and AncoraTN, I'm Leslie Eiler Thompson. Thanks for listening.